This segment of the Alice Stewart Show is brought to you by Aero Plumbing. For all your household or business plumbing needs, call Aero Plumbing at 1-866-PLUMBER or schedule an appointment online at aeroplumbing.net.
Welcome back to the Alice Stewart Show, 7:35, 25 minutes before 8 o'clock. Happy Halloween, everyone, but don't get too caught up with that. Make sure if you have time today to go early vote, you check that off your list of things to do. 4 days until the big midterm elections, and a lot is riding on your vote and many of these races. Here to talk about the state of play in Washington and how it will affect folks here in Arkansas, I'm joined with Mark Tapscott. He is the executive editor at the Washington Examiner. Mark, great to have you here.
Well, good morning. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. And I know it's getting ready to be super busy there in Washington, and certainly in the Washington Examiner offices there. But I want to ask you about the big question here on Tuesday night will be whether or not Republicans gain control in the Senate. 6 seats will determine that. One of the big races that all eyes are on is here in Arkansas, the race between Senator Mark Pryor and Congressman Tom Cotton. What's your view on that race?
Well, I think one of my favorite moments from this entire campaign occurred in Arkansas a couple of weeks ago when the Ebola issue was first becoming very prominent, and you'll recall that he was asked about that particular issue and had the look of a deer caught in the headlights on a highway at night.
That would be an accurate description.
Yes.
He was kind of at a loss for words, I guess you could say.
Well, having been in situations where I, too, was at a loss for words, I kind of felt sorry for him. But,
right.
That really epitomized, I think, both the situation in the Arkansas race and nationally, because all of these incumbent Democrats, like Mr. Pryor and Mr. Udall in Colorado and across the country in the races, are having to run under the most incredibly negative kind of political atmosphere for them that you can imagine. I mean, you have all of these crises like Ebola and the situation in the Middle East and Americans being beheaded on video by Islamic terrorists who basically are laughing at us and threatening to kill us. And what does the president do? He's playing golf. He's doing political fundraisers. He's saying we don't have a strategy yet. I just cannot imagine a more difficult political atmosphere to try to get voters to say, hey, give me 6 more years.
Well, and that's significant. And you mentioned the Mark Pryor moment where he is at a loss for words when asked on Ebola. The thing that got him there is he attacked Congressman Cotton on Ebola, making up some story that he voted to bring Ebola to this country. And then when Casey Hunt, the reporter, asked him, well, what's the administration's response? How are they handling it? He didn't have an answer. And I think that's where people are losing their enthusiasm for the Democrats, is that you can't. It's difficult to defend what all of these things you're talking about, and these senators are rubber stamps for this administration.
Well, and you know what really was difficult for him and other Democrats across the country in that question that she asked him, what is the administration's policy? Well, the problem is, in many of these cases, the administration either doesn't have a coherent policy, or the policies that it pursues clearly aren't working. And when, you can't say, well, here we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that, and here's what the outcome will be. When you can't say that, the American people, whether they're Republicans or Democrats or, it doesn't really make any difference. They look at that and they say, well, these people don't know what they're doing. We need somebody new.
And we've seen, staying on this race, we've seen Congressman Cotton with a trend up in the polls. Real Clear Politics has had him up 4 or 5 points for quite some time. The new poll that came out just yesterday from the University of Arkansas shows Congressman Cotton with a 13-point lead. Congressman Cotton, 49%, Mark Pryor, 36%. Mark, your thoughts on that kind of polling data 4 days out from an election?
Well, you've been around politics for a long time, and the last week before an election typically sees an awful lot of races that the ultimate winner begins to stretch a little bit of a lead because independent voters start making up their mind. People who haven't been paying attention start making up their mind, and the number of undecideds is reduced quite a bit. And I think that's especially what you're seeing here in the Arkansas race and several of the others as well. You know, I grew up in Oklahoma,
right.
And I can very vividly remember when, if you were a Republican in Oklahoma or Texas or Arkansas or Louisiana, you basically didn't mention it in polite company.
Absolutely right.
And, you know, all four of those states have really just totally turned around in the last decade or so. And, you know, I think you have probably in Arkansas still some folks who wish that it was, you know, the good old days when the Democrats ran things, but they know that, you know, things are just not working, and we've got to try something new.
And we're seeing that in Arkansas quite a bit. The good old Democrat guard is folks are beginning to realize those policies don't work, and we see that here in Arkansas based on this polling data. And I encourage folks to go to WashingtonExaminer.com and see this article that you have up about Arkansas is just one poll, but there are three of the most important polls released just before midterms. You mentioned the Arkansas poll that we just discussed, but also in Georgia, my home state, in Georgia, a big race there with Michelle Nunn, who is a legacy there in Georgia, just like Mark Pryor. But Michelle Nunn's father had been elected official for many years. She is running neck and neck with her Republican opponent, David Perdue. And the latest polls out there show that Nunn leading Perdue by just 2 points. And this should have been a runaway by her. Your thoughts on those numbers?
Well, you know, I think the Georgia race, I think people, a lot of our colleagues in the media tend to kind of miss the basic fact about that race, and that is that Michelle Nunn's father, former Senator Sam Nunn, was one of the last of the breed of patriotic, conservative, moderately conservative Democrats from southern states who were not ideologues, and they weren't obsessed partisans. They were Americans who happened to be Democrats.
Right.
And he was very, very respected by everybody in both parties, and was an immensely popular guy in Georgia. And she's benefiting immensely just from that fact that her father was Sam Nunn. You know, she's, frankly, I don't think she's run a very competent campaign. She's made some real mistakes. But then David Perdue hasn't run such a great campaign either. And Georgia politics are very much up in the air right now in terms of you've got some libertarian folks that are not happy. You've got some Tea Party folks who are not happy. And it's kind of up in the air as to how all that's going to sort out. So I think that race, I think you're right. You would expect her to be much further ahead perhaps at this point, but I think that race is going to be the one that we probably won't know the result of come Wednesday morning.
Right, and I agree with you on the assessment of her father. Very similar to Zell Miller, former governor there in Georgia, in terms of reaching across the aisle. One more quick race before we go to break I want to ask you about Colorado, and that is another one that should have been Democrat, should have run away with this, but now we have Republican Representative Cory Gardner going against incumbent Senator Mark Udall, and Gardner, Republican, is ahead 46-39.
Yeah. You'll recall in 2010 when Republicans everywhere else in the country were doing very, very well, the Colorado situation with Ken Buck in the Senate race and an absolutely totally amazing, crazy Republican side in the governor's race. The Republicans probably made every mistake that they possibly could and did not do very well, even as Republicans everywhere else in the country were doing very well. This year, it's been the Democrats that have had the campaign of horrors. Mark Udall is, you know, he's a pretty smart guy. He's got a great name. He comes from a family that is extraordinarily popular throughout the West, and yet, whoever made the decision to run on a one-issue campaign, the war on women, if I was Mark Udall, I'd fire that guy.
Right.
I would have fired him a long time ago, because even the Denver Post said, this is ridiculous. We're gonna endorse Cory Gardner.
That's right, and that's a liberal paper, and that's taking the war on women strategy, hook, line, and sinker, is the very reason why he is referred to now as Senator Mark Uterus instead of Mark Udall. All right, we're going to take a break, and then I want to talk more what's going to happen after the election, get your thoughts on that. So we'll take a break, joined with Mark Tapscott. He is the executive editor at the Washington Examiner. We'll be back with more of the Alice Stewart Show right after this segment of the program brought to you by Aero Plumbing. For all of your household or business plumbing needs, give them a call, 501-588-3200, or go online at aeroplumbing.net.